What's going on, guys, and welcome to another book club with me, Robert Nichols. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there as we get started tonight. For those of you that don't know, we're reading Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. It's a great book that really talks about who folks are in the world who've had an impact and what they've done in order to stand out for the right reasons, and how we all can take those lessons, apply them to our lives, and do exactly the same thing so that we can become greater tomorrow than we are today. And so as we jump into this section of Outliers, this is the last book club episode on the book. We are covering sections 7 through 10, chapter 7 through 10. And let's just get into it, guys. Chapter 7 is called Ethnic Theory of Plane Crashes. And really how he breaks into this chapter, it's all about communication. At the end of the day, when you communicate clearly, you can get better results from the things you're working on, from the people in your life, and from those around you. But when you communicate very ambiguously, it can lead to pain and even in some cases death. And he talks about how pilots who have ethnic backgrounds rooted in Asian countries such as South Korea, they don't communicate directly, they don't communicate clearly. And as a result, many planes have crashed because they weren't able to tell the captain that there were real problems. So I'll give you one example. He shares a story about a South Korean plane trying to land in New York. The New York air traffic controllers are known to be extremely rude, right? And so because they're known to be extremely rude, many docile folks or folks who don't like conflict and don't like confrontation don't communicate with them directly. And so this plane was trying to land. They were running out of fuel. And as opposed to telling the New York traffic controller, we're out of fuel, there is an emergency here, they asked them, hey, do you have enough fuel to get there? They were like, I think so. This particular assistant didn't tell the captain, and how did they end up in the end? They end up crashing into a side of a cliff, and everyone on the plane essentially dies because of a lack of communication. And so Malcolm Gladwell really encourages us to understand that if we are not direct, if we're not able to use our words to advocate for ourselves and speak clearly, there are many instances in life where you're not going to get the desired outcome. Another great example of this is if you're a student, right? And I think we've all been here and you're struggling with the class. I remember my father told me early on about some of his brothers and sisters. Now, he had 11 kids and family. And so this is something they used a lot and something that all of us can use. But when any of them were struggling in a class, they would always make it a point to meet with the professor, especially in college, after class in study hall, and to show that they were committed to getting better and asking for help. And so when you consistently meet with folks, you consistently show up, you show that you are committed to yourself. You show you're committed to learning. Even if you struggle, your grades may not be the best. He said 9 times out of 10, the teacher's going to give you a passing grade. And sometimes even like they'll give you a B because of the effort that you showed by communicating with them, by advocating for yourself, and by being direct about, hey, I need help and I'm going to make the best effort I can. But if you kind of sit back and chill and you don't, obviously make your best effort and apply yourself, the results you get will be subpar. They're not going to be in line with what you ultimately should be able to get just by making an additional effort, So take this as a lesson as you're out here living in this world. Be very clear in your mind, first and foremost, on what you want. And then secondly, come up with a plan of action to get it. Whether that's obviously the steps you're going to take in order for you to achieve a certain goal. So like, for example, if you want to build a real estate portfolio, you're going to need to learn certain skill sets. So skill set number 1 is going to be learning how to find deals. Skill set number 2 is going to be learning how to analyze deals. The next skill you're going to need is how to creatively finance those deals. Once you find them, you also want to learn how to negotiate deals. And then you're going to want to learn how to manage the project so that you can exit that deal for a profit. And through that journey, you're going to have to be very direct with people in order to get the most out of those experiences and interactions that you have. And I can tell you guys, for example, the very first flip I did, I struggled. And the reason I struggled is that I wasn't clear on what I wanted done. And so we ended up hiring a handyman to do a contractor's job. And when we hired that handyman, the expectation was he was going to come in, do a quick paint job, clean it up, and call it a day. But we really needed the kitchen and bathrooms to be gutted. Again, he didn't know how to do it. We didn't clearly communicate it. So he came in and was doing his thing. And it created instant conflict. My wife was the one who spotted it. And, we got into it. We ended up kicking the guy off the job. But because we in real estate and in construction, you need to be very clear. Never happened again relative to someone not understanding our expectations. And so this is a big part of you guys really cultivating a life that is going to get you the desired outcome and get you what you want. Another thing that Malcolm Gladwell talked about that I found interesting was the PDI index, so power distance index. It's how you talk to a boss or someone senior to you. One of my friends, since we were kids, always called his mother by her first name. And I'm just like, yo, that's kind of crazy. If I call my mom by her first name, I'm going to get popped. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know about you guys. There's a lot of different family dynamics. But in my household, you do not call your parents by their first name. And so, I always found that very strange. And I think that's a case where, there's just not that level of respect. Everybody's relationship is different, but ultimately you want to give your parents a certain level of respect. And Malcolm Gladwell calls this the power distance index, where yes, there are certain people in society and our families that we have to speak a certain way to. But when it comes to business and when it comes to life or death situations, you have to be able to be very clear and direct. And that's kind of going back to the South Korean pilots and even some Colombian pilots in another scenario. Folks were not direct. And as a result, people lost their lives. So I know that's an extreme case, but for you and for me, if we're not direct, it could mean us losing an opportunity. So I think it's really important that, we speak on it. There are a lot of professional athletes out there, right? My son is one of them, and he's on his journey to becoming a pro. He's a pro now, actually, in the second division team, but he's on a journey to get to the first team and then to see where he can take it from there. But one of the most important pieces of that puzzle is going to be his ability to speak and advocate for himself when it comes to expectations from the coach. So, for example, one of the things we talk about a lot in our house is if you want to earn a starting position on a team, you need to ask the coach, what is it going to take for me to start, coach? You look back at Kobe Bryant, he had that in him, right? He's always talking to coaches. He's always talking to folks in the organization about what it's going to take for him to get that starting position. Even when he was a young kid, you knew he was going places. Same for a guy like Michael Jordan. A lot of people don't know this about Michael Jordan, but when he got cut from his high school basketball team, Michael Jordan went to train with the coach one-on-one every day. Like, he was like, all right, coach, I see I got cut. What is it going to take for me to get on? The coach said, I need you to work with me, man. You got to come here 6 a.m., put in that work, and then you're going to have that opportunity that you wanted. And guess what? He committed. He put in the work, and he was able to become a successful starter. But he would have never have known that if he wasn't able to effectively just ask a question that was going to lead to him understanding the steps he needed to take to get what he wanted. And so it really comes down to, if we want better results out of our lives, we have to ask better questions. The better the questions we ask, the easier it is for us to understand how someone else is thinking, not assuming. And so we can now adjust our behaviors and adjust our actions to ensure that that person can see that we are willing to work and to pursue, and we need their support on. So that's the big thing, right? Sometimes in life, same thing goes in the work environment. You've got to be able to advocate for yourself and tell your boss when they're wrong. I remember coming up one time, I was working in corporate, and one of my bosses had asked me a question about a decision I had made. This is when I was working in corporate as a buyer, procurement buyer. And I told him my reasoning, and he said that was the stupidest thing I ever heard. Now, as a young 20-some-year-old, I balled up my fist, and I was ready. Like, I really literally thought about punching this man. I didn't end up punching him, obviously, because I might not be here on this call right now. But we all have those moments where, it's really hard to actually advocate for ourselves and communicate when you have someone on the other end that just is totally unreasonable. And so my reaction was to literally go find another job. Like, that was the catalyst for me, as opposed to trying to fight in an environment that didn't fit my personality. And Malcolm Gladwell talks about this. So I went and found an entirely new environment. And my wife was the one who encouraged me to do it in real estate full time. And literally that day I found a job, went on Craigslist, found a job offer, applied, and I got the job. And so I took myself out of the environment where I had a boss that really didn't understand me, just totally disrespectful to me. I had done everything to advocate for myself, wasn't hearing me. And so that really is another thing I want to mention to you guys. When those situations arise where you are not being heard and you're advocating for yourselves, it's likely time for you to leave and find a better opportunity. And guess what? We are all able to do that no matter what happens in our lives. And so I really want to just remind you guys that it's super important to know when it's time to go. That's something that I think is just, it can't be said enough. So another big piece of what he talks about in this chapter is language. And so one of the issues with the South Korean language is that they have like 5 or 6 different levels of politeness. So like instead of saying hi, how you doing, it's like kind of like bowing, hello sir, or hello ma'am. They had like 5 or 6 levels. And so if a pilot is senior and then you got assistant pilots or co-pilots that are below, they're not going to speak to him in direct manner. So the solution to this, the Korean Air Consultant, which taught everyone how to speak English first, and they did all the instruction in English so that there was no hierarchy of communication when it came to that. And guess what happened? They became one of the safe airlines in the world. And I think the lesson from this chapter for all of us is we have to be able to be aware of where we're falling short in our lives of our goals, and we have to be willing to make the adjustments. Don't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And as I always say, guys, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And so if you want a different outcome in your life, something's got to change, and it's up to you to figure out what that something is. So I really hope this helps you guys from chapter 7 as we jump into chapter 8, which kind of takes a whole different spin on this. And this chapter really, to me, I call this the hard work chapter. It talks all about hard work and what it takes to really leverage hard work when it comes for us to achieve our goals and push through some adversity, push through hard things that sometimes just seem like they're impossible. And the name of the chapter is Rice Paddies and Math Tests. And the reason he calls it Rice Paddies is rice harvesting is one of the hardest types of farming that there is on the planet. And it's because you need a certain level of water, you need a certain amount of space, and there's so many variables and factors as a farmer you have to control in order to successfully grow rice and harvest rice. And at this time, this was in like the 1800s and early 1900s in China, in this, I think it was Southeast China, they depended on rice to survive. I mean, everything in the society, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, all rice dishes, and they really perfected it. But in order for them to do this, they actually had to carve out channels in the mountains from streams to bring the water in. There were a lot of different things that they had to do in order for the water level to be maintained, the soil level to be maintained, the fertilizer. I mean, there was just so much happening every day. And if you did one thing wrong, you could have a bad harvest that literally can wipe out your family's fortune. And so that's one of the things he shares, is that in this part of China, they literally would work some days, 12-hour days, nonstop. And they really took in like 360 days a year and do this. And now he contrasts this to European farmers of the era, which would work anywhere from, let's say, 4 to 6 months out of the year, sometimes 9 months, and then they take 3 to 6 months off. Some of these farmers in like France, for example, would hibernate. They'd eat less food, they'd do less work, they'd lose weight, stay indoors in bed the whole time and not waste energy. While in China, all these years, all these decades, they're working nonstop. And so what that did for Chinese people is it created a culture in which they believe anything is achievable through hard work. But the reality is that's true for all of us, not just them. And that's one of the big lessons he shares. He shares a lot of quotes. I'm going to share one of these with you guys now. This one is, it says, a Russian proverb: if God doesn't bring it, the earth will not give it, right? So this is a Russian proverb. And if you contrast that with some of the Chinese proverbs, it's pretty amazing and very telling, based on what they believe was the foundation of work. And ultimately, the whole point of it was success is the function of attitude, right? Success is the function of your attitude, not ability. That's one of the lessons that they shared from the Chinese folks. And then in addition to that, let me see here. There were also some great quotes. I don't know why they got deleted here from my outline, but ultimately the whole point is that the harder you work, the more successful you are. They're not dependent on nature. They're not dependent on anything other than their ability to understand that, we keep showing up no matter what Mother Nature shows at us, and good things are going to happen. And that really is the same for all of us in our lives, guys, as we progress forward. And so that really is the gist of the chapter. He does also start talking about how language is important, and how, like in Chinese, the number system is structured where there's less syllables for the same numbers. And so for American kids who struggle with math, a lot of it is early on. They're not able to absorb as much information, or it takes more brain power to understand numbers in English than it does in Spanish, just the way the system is designed. And so, he just encourages us to understand that it isn't a function of our ability that stops us from necessarily being good at math. It's just a function of the system itself. And so we have to be willing to work through that. We have to be willing to spend 10, 20, 30 minutes on a math problem relative to solving any problem in our lives. And he says that's one of the benefits of the Chinese culture. They don't give up as easily. When they've done studies in America, our kids give up 5, 10 minutes, whereas Chinese kids will go 20, 30 minutes until they solve it, but then you actually learn it. And so hard things really create an easier path in the future versus an easy path now makes your future harder. And I think it's a really good lesson for all of us to understand and really adapt. And that's really it for chapter 8. And then as we jump into the last chapter, is chapter 9. It's called Marita's Bargain. He jumps into KIPP Academy, which is a school that is a charter school in New York City that is for urban kids who come from disadvantaged homes. The majority of the kids in these schools are single parent households. It's like 99% minorities, Black and Latino kids from Bronx in New York. They've expanded throughout the country now, so they have these charter schools all over. But this school was really designed to prove that any kid is capable. And so what they ended up doing, they took all these kids from these underprivileged homes and they put them in a school environment where they go to school 6 days a week. So they go to school Monday through Saturday. They have much longer school days. And so the school day starts at 7:25 and it doesn't end until 5 p.m. And then they have a very short summer. They only have a part of June, all of July off, and they're back to school in August. Now, in August, they go to school from 8 to 2. And so what ended up happening with these kids, they all began to test in the high percentages of math in America. Like top schools, like is higher and higher than kids at prep schools. They do very well in the math, SAT, and all of the academics really started to transform these kids' lives. And so these kids from the hood, their lives are not the norm, right? They literally work harder and they basically are working at the level of a lawyer who's trying to make partner. Long days, early mornings, late nights. A lot of these kids have to get up at 5:45 in the morning just to get to school on time. They stay there till 5 o'clock. If they have extracurricular activities, they're there till 7 o'clock at night, get home, eat, do their homework, rinse and repeat. They do it again. And Malcolm Gladwell says this creates kids who really are sacrificing their childhood for their future life, future opportunities that they will otherwise not have. And the lesson for all in this is when we understand where we want our lives to go, it's super important to come up with a game plan to get us there and then to consistently execute that plan at all costs. And I don't know if everyone's willing to make that sacrifice, but great rewards require great sacrifices. And then the other thing he talks about is, and this is more for the parents out there, he says that our school system as a whole is flawed because we put too much of an emphasis on kids not being overeducated, right? We're like, oh, we need a 3-month summer vacation. That wasn't always the way. Oh, they don't need long school days. They need time to be creative and time to play. But the counter argument to that and the proof that that isn't necessarily true is these kids at KIPP Academy, they're still very creative. They're still doing amazing things. And they actually have a stronger work ethic. They're performing better in every category than the kids who go to the normal public school and have normal school days. And so he says the big problem in America isn't the fact that kids are overeducated. He's saying his kids are undereducated and that we are overly concerned with summer activities and having summertime and time off, as opposed to understanding that when that happens, and they've done studies to prove this, kids actually fall behind. It's not what you gain by continuing to go. It's the kids who take summers off is what they lose when they're not in school, because a lot of the kids aren't doing anything with that time. And so they also look at what's happening like within families, wealthy families, middle-class families versus poor families in the summer. Middle-class and wealthy families are allowing their kids to still go to tutoring, summer school, and voluntary educational type environments, whereas poor kids are just hanging out doing anything. And that's where they see the biggest gap in the summers. When the kids come back to school and they tested for this, you saw a huge fall off on the test scores of the poor kids, whereas middle class and wealthy kids continue to do well and progress forward. Now, by the end of the year, the poor kids caught up and were able to learn a lot, but that gap kept happening every year. And every year that gap got wider and wider and wider. And that's where you have the haves and the have-nots out here, guys. And so it's really important to be aware of what it takes to consistently get better at whatever your craft is, whatever your skill is. I know I've been in real estate for 20 years, and not it's funny. I hear Myron Golden talk about the man who says, I only know how to drive a forklift, and I've been doing it for 40 years, and that's all I know how to do. And he's like, man, you've been driving that forklift for 40 years, but you've been driving it the same. You haven't consistently gotten better over those 40 years, right? So you can be doing something, and you can be in an industry. I know plenty of real estate agents that are in the game as agents, and they've been in the game for 50 years, but they're terrible agents, right? Because they're not elevating themselves. They're not working on their skill set. They're actually not challenging themselves to keep elevating to the next level. And so that's really the big thing. Whatever it is you're doing, and if you feel like you've mastered it, there's always another level. We've never totally mastered anything. And that's something I've learned as I've progressed forward in my life. And so if you are feeling stagnated, if you're feeling bored, if you're feeling like you're not growing, I really want to encourage you to start looking at what that next level looks like. Look for someone out there who's doing more than you, making more than you, who has a better life than you in the same arena, and start to model yourself after what they're doing and start to ask yourself, hey, what are they doing that I'm not doing that would help elevate me and allow me to learn a new skill set and become better, right? Sometimes it's a career change, but I'm telling you, I promise you, there's always a level to the game. If you're, deciding that you want more out of life, you've got to find a way to figure out what skill set you have that can be developed to get you there. So I appreciate you guys jumping on. Quick last few things here. If you look at the annual school days, this is some stats I'm going to give you guys quickly that he shared in the book. In the United States, annually, we have about 180 school days for kids in high school and under. In South Korea, they have 220 school days. And in Japan, they have 243 school days. And so, that's an advantage for them right there. That's a big part of why a lot of kids struggle and a lot of folks are able to thrive in the same environment, especially when people come from other countries and come into America. They definitely do have an advantage when it comes to mathematics and some of the other skill sets, such as hard work, just because they're used to going hard every day, 24/7. And so that's really it. And that's really how he ends the book. The last chapter, he has an epilogue that talks about the origin story of his mother, who was from Jamaica, and father. She met in England. His father and mother met in England. And it just really chronicles the fact that it sounds like a fairy tale story initially. Young Jamaican girl gets a scholarship to University of London, meets a guy in the class. He's kind of fumbling over his words during the speech. They fall in love, get married, have him. But then he goes back to the origin stories and talks about all of the opportunities and all of the different factors that allowed him to be successful, and allowed them to meet and allowed her to make it to England from rural Jamaica. It's a pretty fascinating story. And I encourage you guys, if you haven't read the epilogue, to definitely check it out. And then for me, some closing thoughts on the book and things that really resonated me with the most is opportunities are everywhere. We just have to know where to find them. And it really also comes down to the era that we were born in, the era that we're in today, and the skills we have. I believe that if you marry your current interests and skills, the things you love, and marry those with the different opportunities in our era, whether it's doing live streams on YouTube, right? Creating YouTube videos that add value, whether it's working in the AI field, whether it's construction or real estate, whether it's the stock market, we're at unprecedented times where we have more opportunities to make money than we've ever had before. And so it's really on us to understand, how do we marry our interests and our skill sets and our passions with the opportunities that are out here today that will allow us to really thrive and make better decisions, make better lives for ourselves, and build a legacy. Because at the end of the day, we can work as hard as we can. Let's say we work in a grocery store bagging groceries, but you're only going to go so far, right? Maybe you go to the top and you become a manager. But in today's world, for me, I believe I've been called to have massive impact. And if you feel the same, you're on this call for a reason. It's definitely important that you start to explore what mediums are out there that allow you to do that, and whether it's, again, looking at different mentorship programs, coaching programs. I do a lot of that for folks as well, so that you can upskill yourself, but start to really invest in yourself so that you can take advantage of everything. Appreciate you guys getting on. I see Jimmy's on here tonight. I see Damien, self-belief and hard work will always earn you success. Good stuff, brother. I see Mario out there. Appreciate you getting on, Mario, as well. And, I think the other thing that my other big takeaway for me is just self-advocacy and how important it is, because we're all taught that hard work is what it's all about. If you work so hard, they can't ignore you, you will be successful, right? But the other side to that coin is you also have to be able to effectively communicate with folks out there that are whatever, your boss. Like I have a friend of mine who his girlfriend, fiance is in Boston Ballet. And it's super, super competitive, guys. Like the higher you go in society, the more competitive it is. And as you get to that next level, everybody's good. So what separates the good from the great? Well, one of the things Malcolm Gladwell says is the 10,000 hour rule, right? If you do something for 10,000 hours, you're likely to become a master at it by society's standards. However, even if you do it for 10,000 hours, if you're not able to be confident and able to tell people why you belong in the room when you're going to audition, for example, if you're a musician, for a new band or an orchestra, or for a role, if you're an actor, like that, those are the pieces of the puzzle, whether you advocate for yourself or you have an advocate that advocates for you, your agent, in some cases, your parents when you're a kid. Like I was really shocked to learn all of the times that people's parents and the environments people were in and the people around them, and how that really created the opportunity. Like, for example, Bill Gates, his mother and a bunch of moms got together and bought a computer for Bill Gates's school when he was like 13 years old. And so from the age of 13, Bill Gates had access to a computer. And back in the day, you had to pay like by the hour to access the internet and access the computer. But Bill Gates' mom had bought a computer for the school for him and his friends, and they could code like 24/7. They could be on that computer all day, every day. So he had a huge advantage just by being able to have access to that computer as a young kid. Same thing goes for the Beatles. When they went to Germany, they weren't a very good band, but because they had to play 1,200 shows in almost 3 years, 8 hours straight, each show was 8 hours straight, nonstop, they became one of the greatest bands of all time just through repetition. And again, it was just a weird opportunity that came up for them to go over there, and they ended up staying over there for a few years and did a couple tours. But ultimately, those are the pieces of the puzzle that can make us or break us. And so opportunity recognition is huge. And then the second piece, self-advocacy. And then lastly, our skill sets. And so really the book to me takes all of the responsibility off of society and off of the world to make us great, and puts it back on us to ensure that we are committed to making sure that we can just be aware of, what's out there for us. I'll tell you guys a quick story about myself and really how I got into real estate. It was kind of by chance, right? Like literally sitting in the right place at the right time. When I first graduated from college, I ended up working at Stop and Shop, and I was in the stores at the time. So I had one of my buddies, he was about 5 years older than me, and we would have these monthly meetings at the stores. And he just happened to come into the meeting one day in a 3-piece suit, looking super, super like sharp. Like he was, looking real good. Like, hey, what's up, guys? The manager said, man, you look like $1 million today, brother. And he was like, I know. I'm like, man, he's kind of cocky, man. I'm like, what's up with this dude? And he just happened to sit next to me, right? And at the time, I was making $36,000 a year. And this guy whips out a $10,000 check. Now, I'm 22 years old, freshly out of college. I never seen a $10,000 check. I didn't come from money. And it kind of blew my mind. I was like, man, first thing I said, man, why'd you get that? What did you do, rob a bank? Because in my world, no one was making that kind of money. My dad at the time was making like 40 grand a year. And so he said, nah, brother, I told you, got to get into this real estate game. Got to get into this real estate game. And so once he shared that with me, he started to mentor me and teach me and everything else. But honestly, guys, I had never thought about getting into real estate up until seeing that $10,000 check and seeing someone who's from my community, from my environment, from my neighborhood, making that kind of money, and then he showed me his bank account because he had sold another property and made $250,000 before he turned 30. I'm like, what is going on here? It just kind of blew my mind. And so, it definitely sparked something in me that got me interested. And initially it was the money, but more importantly was the freedom. It was the upward mobility. It was just understanding that, you know what, even though you came from somewhere that's tough and you didn't have the skill set, you can still get there despite where you started. And so that was really the beginning. And so if I hadn't been sitting next to him that day, right, when I reflect on this, I might not be here on this call right now. And so this is why I want you guys, as you're living your life, as you're going out here and striving every day, to start to recognize different things that happen that could be that catalyst for your transformation. I'll leave you guys with that. Lastly, before we close up tonight, thank you everyone for getting on. Mauricio, I see you working every day to build yourself to become the greatest outlier. Absolutely. I love that, man. That's what we have to do. We got to work every day to become the greatest outlier. And, we have to work to be that rich uncle we never had, right? I know people always say they wish they had a rich uncle, but for me, I want to be the rich uncle. That's what I want to be. And I hope all of you guys are rich auntie for the girls on the call. If there's girls out there listening. Lastly, guys, if you guys want to connect with me, we have something called Investors Edge. It's on school.com. It's SKOOL.com/Investors Edge. No spaces. And in that group, you will have access to me every week. And one of my friends who's an expert, we got Jimmy who's on here. He's a tax expert. We've got stock experts, crypto experts, fitness experts, mindset coaches. Like, it's a great environment that I've created along with my team member, Mauricio here, for us to be able to help folks level up and upskill themselves on a weekly basis with just 1 hour a week. Put you in a community and environment that will really flip the switch and change your mindset and really be the catalyst for you to know some new opportunities that are out there for you. So if you guys are interested in that, send me a DM on IG or message me on YouTube or Twitch, wherever you're watching this. I'll send you the details on it. It's only $97 a month. You can try it out for the first month and quit at any time if you're not getting value. But we believe we're delivering tremendous value as we're helping folks make more money, find new opportunities, quit their 9-to-5s, and really build better relationships, build more confidence, and start loving their life. And so if that's something that you're interested in, please hit us up and let us know. Thank you, everyone, for jumping on tonight. That is the end of Outliers. Next week, we are going to do Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. So if you haven't read that book, I suggest you get a copy. It is one of my top 2 books. Really, it's back and forth between Shoe Dog and this book, Man's Search for Meaning. That's number 1 and 2. But definitely, we'll see you guys on again, 8 p.m., same time, same place. I hope everyone out there, again, happy Father's Day. Appreciate you guys. Now let's get it and make it a great week. Take care.